Welcome to Logistics Business Conversations, the podcast exploring the ideas and insights shaping today's logistics industry. Featuring leading voices from across the sector, we examine key trends, emerging challenges, and the innovations driving the future of supply chains.
Welcome to the latest edition of Logistics Business Conversations with me, Paul Hamblin. Today we're talking about a theme which unfortunately is on everyone's lips at the moment for reasons which you certainly don't need me to explain to you. And that theme is energy, and more specifically, energy prices. And it's a double whammy because in addition to the energy spike price due to geopolitical events, you may not also be aware that there is an increase in fixed costs quietly entering the system. Indeed, it came in just a couple of weeks ago in the UK, and which will affect the logistics sector. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by Jack Peck and Nick Hay from Wattstor. Thanks for joining us at Logistics Business Conversations. Perhaps, Jack, you could start by telling us about Wattstor and what you do, quite briefly.
So Wattstor is a next generation electricity company, which is a bit of a mouthful, but what that means in practice is that we combine technology, so on-site solar and battery storage systems, with long-term electricity supply contracts for businesses in the UK and Europe.
And just tell me briefly, tell our audience what your roles are, you guys.
So I'm head of sales, based out of the office in London.
And I'm a senior advisor. I've previously been CEO and MD of a number of large logistics businesses in the UK, and I advise Wattstor in terms of understanding the logistics space specifically.
So Jack, can you tell us these new transmission charges, how do they differ from previous costs and what changes are being made?
Transmission charges are increasing for all business customers from the 1st of April this year. So it will impact businesses across all sectors. And the context here is that the government is currently undergoing a massive redevelopment of our transmission network, spending about £70 billion over the next 5 years. And the way that they've decided to fund these costs is through big uptick in those transmission charges on your electricity bills. So they form part of the standing charge that is currently in your electricity bill, and these will be rising by up to 65% this year for most medium and large energy users in the UK.
And can anyone avoid them? Is anyone going to say, that doesn't apply to me, or I'm exempt?
Unfortunately, by design, they are unavoidable, and it doesn't matter what your overall consumption is. It purely relates to your grid connection and the size of your grid connection and the energy, your peak energy usage on site. So they're unavoidable, but there are measures that companies can take to help mitigate the overall cost of energy bills going up.
Yeah, and we'll talk about those in this podcast, but just forgive me my ignorance on this. Does this apply to all logistics companies, even if you've got only 2 or 3 trucks and a small warehouse, or are we talking this is only for the larger players?
Yeah, this is across the board. So it will impact every business regardless of sector, but the logistics and transportation sectors will be particularly impacted by this increase in charge because they have typically larger grid connections and will bear a larger portion of the charges going forward. But to be clear, it will impact every business in the UK from the 1st of April.
So the time to think about it has already passed, as it's now it's already been in operation for several weeks. So let's move on and get into what they can do, these companies.
Exactly.
Right. So it's a serious issue then. I mean, do you think that will logistics companies already be aware of this, or is this going to be a shock to them?
I think generally it will be a surprise. I think within the logistics sector, people's sophistication in terms of understanding the detail of what goes into their electricity charges, all of the various elements, is not well understood. And I think this will hopefully help people understand it more and give it some focus. But fundamentally, people don't really understand, I believe, the real detail of what makes up their total electricity cost. Where people become more aware of it is either when there's a change like this, or if they're trying to access greater supply from the grid, So the cost of accessing the grid, if someone's growing a site or increasing their electricity demand, perhaps through EVs or growth in their business, that's when logistics businesses typically find out just how expensive it is to get incremental supply from the grid, which is why these charges are coming in, because the grid is stretched. So the exact root cause of this going up is a national grid that needs investment. It's that requirement for investment to increase supply that's also causing logistics businesses big costs if they want to increase the amount of electricity they're drawing.
So it's fair to say there's no way out of it. There's no sort of corners you can cut. You're going to have to face this, correct?
Correct. And that is by design. The government need to find the money for this investment from somewhere, and they've chosen to take it from electricity bills in this way. So it's unavoidable, and it is charged as a daily rate according to the size of the grid connection that you have as a business. So yeah, there are things that we can do and businesses need to engage with in order to minimize costs around their energy bills, but this a particular charge will be unavoidable.
But what can be avoided, though, Paul, is if you're close to one of the bands that Jack's just referred to, if you work with somebody like Wattstor, you can potentially avoid the need to increase the size of your supply. So if you're close to one of those bands and about to trip up into the next band if you need more energy on your site, if you work with someone like Wattstor, we can potentially provide solutions that keep you below that next threshold. So cost avoidance is something that is certainly possible in terms of these changes.
Right, so we'll get into that. But first, is there any measure you can put on how this will impact logistics operators in particular, or is it harder to quantify?
So the charge and the price that logistic companies will pay will depend on their banding and the size of their grid connection. But broadly speaking, for medium to higher energy users, of which lots of the logistics and transport sector will fall into, you can expect a cost increase in the region of £75,000 this year or upwards. So it's a 65% uplift on average of this charge from last year. And this takes effect from the 1st of April. So it's a sizable increase, and one which, frankly, I think most businesses, logistics aside, have not really cottoned on to yet. And this is going to have a major impact on business decisions and business operations over the next 5 years.
I think perhaps we should get into how you can help these companies.
Sure. Well, we obviously look at this from the technology side first and foremost. We work with businesses to help them understand these charges and what they can do to help mitigate them. I think it's really important to say that businesses need to start engaging with this fully in these costs in a way that they haven't done before. I think previously companies have relied a lot on their energy brokers. Perhaps energy was a procurement overhead, or was seen as just a procurement overhead. And now they really need to start thinking about this and how it's going to impact a business operationally, especially when they're looking at electrifying fleets, moving from diesel into electric fleets, and potentially looking to upgrade their grid connections from what they are at the moment to allow for additional energy on site. It's very important to understand, if you're looking at your grid connection and deploying new infrastructure on your site, that you aren't exposing yourselves directly to these higher fixed costs. You need to be looking at operationally what you can do to deploy technology to help reduce these costs, lower the unit cost of energy, and maximize the use of your grid connection without going higher into the next banding and exposing yourselves to more fixed costs down the road.
Yeah, and if you think about it, Paul, from an electric fleet point of view, if you're looking to deploy, and I had this direct experience in one of my sites, one of the limitations to how many electric vehicles we could deploy was the size of the grid connection. And it wasn't a choice to increase the grid connection. There wasn't further grid availability. And most fleets will be stood for the same time of the day. And therefore, most fleets will be looking to charge at the same time. So that incremental requirement for energy for a period of time, not necessarily your overall requirement for energy, but that period of time where you're trying to charge multiple vehicles, that's where Wattstor can bring solutions that enable you to charge multiple vehicles at the same time without necessarily increasing your overall draw from the grid. So you're avoiding going up into that next band, maximizing the use of the energy that you've got available to you, and giving you the ability to charge multiple assets at the same time. And that's something which I think increasingly people are going to have to think about as we look at the energy transition to BEVs over time.
So what are the tools then that you can provide and the assets that you can provide as Wattstor to put in place the things that you were just talking about?
So we would always work with companies to look at what they can generate on site themselves. So reduce the reliance on grid imported electricity by generating their own energy, and particularly utilizing battery storage as a buffer. So batteries are great. They're a way of essentially giving you existing or supplementing your existing grid connection without asking the grid for a larger grid connection size and exposing yourself to those higher fixed costs. We can install a battery, supplement the existing grid connection, so making use of what you have already without exposing customers to these cost increases that you can see. So it's really about understanding what you can do with your sites before you go and ask grid to upgrade your supply that has a cost in and of itself, and then the increased fixed costs that come as a result.
And I think just to add a couple of points to that. So in summary, what we basically do is we smooth the energy through the day using batteries to match the requirement and take off that peak draw from the grid. I think the other thing that's really impressed me since I've joined Wattstor and been advising them is their ability to do a desktop exercise and understand this very, very quickly for a potential client is really impressive. You then need to get into the detail, but that first desktop exercise, which says this is the kind of solution and the kind of cost that we can avoid or the saving we can provide, the speed of that is really quick. We don't need an awful lot of information from a potential customer, and that then enables us to get into that next level of detail.
Right. I'm just coming back. I want to get into the price protect, if I may, but just before that, Jack, you mentioned about companies generating their own electricity. I mean, that's exciting. Do you find that many companies in logistics are already thinking about that kind of thing, or is it a new concept to them that they can generate their own power?
I think some or most will have looked at solar in some form over the years. It's been around for a long time. The business case for doing it has been fantastic and still remains that way. The thing that they haven't really engaged with yet is the massive potential that battery storage offers, both to help reduce those standing charges that we mentioned, but also to deploy more renewables on site to give you a much larger portion of your or coverage of your energy bill from your on-site generation that solar can't do on its own. And solar is great for reducing your overall demand, but it can't be deployed at will. So it can't help reduce your peak demand necessarily. And that's where batteries can come in. They act as that buffer. So you can deploy more and generate more as a result. And we can use batteries intelligently to deliver much lower cost of electricity to the site. Still, the difficulty with having your own on-site systems is that they are expensive, and that's where Price Protect, or our funded solution, comes to the fore. But it's certainly key that customers start to re-engage if they've looked at it before. It's looking at what they could do in addition to what they have already, or expanding their existing systems. Or if they haven't looked at it, then now is a great time to be doing that.
And just explain to us how Price Protect works.
So Price Protect offers customers a long-term electricity contract, which offers a price cap, which is why it's called Price Protect. So it protects customers from the current situation that we're seeing in Iran, and we've seen previously during COVID and Russia, Ukraine. So we give them a maximum amount that they will ever pay for the contract term. We also have a mechanism that allows them to track energy prices downwards as well. So when we return to normal, or where energy prices start to reduce again in the medium and longer terms, then customers can reap the benefits of falling energy prices in the future as well. And crucially, Price Protect also includes a funded renewable energy system. So typically it's a rooftop solar project with a battery storage system. So you get the additional benefits of savings to those fixed charges that we mentioned at the start. So those transmission charges, which battery storage is a great way to help mitigate or really make usage of your existing grid connections without going to the grid to get additional capacity.
Okay, so if I'm a company that's now having to completely rethink my electricity strategy or energy strategy, I should say, how do I go about doing that? How do I start that process? Because it's a big subject, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's key to go and to start engaging with the experts on this before you go down the conventional route of, I'm looking to electrify my fleet. I think I need a new grid connection. It's key that you start understanding the different risks associated with that. So Nick mentioned it up front. We do a lot of work with customers and businesses to help them understand their electricity needs now, but also in the future as well. So we look at the data, the site data now, and take into account what they're looking to do in the future, be that fleet electrification of heating on site as well. And then we help to design a system that is bespoke for that site and gives them operational stability now, but also moving into the future as well.
And how long will that process take? I know it will vary from company to company, but roughly.
Well, the initial sort of consultancy work that we do can take a couple of weeks. It's a fairly quick process. Getting the necessary installation can take 6 to 9 months, but it's not a quick process. But there are things that we can do immediately to help customers in terms of advice and helping them to get the information that they need.
And of course, logistics companies hate impact on operations to impact on their existing processes. What promises or reassurances can you give that you can create a new installation over this period, but without impacting operations and processes?
Well, and I'm sure Nick can speak to this as well. We need access to a customer's roof and maybe a short shutdown in order to energize the system once it's installed. But otherwise, the installation process itself has minimal impact on the business. We wouldn't expect business operations to be impacted at all, frankly, other than some deliveries arriving and some physical unloading of containers on sites, but otherwise it's access to roof. It's very minimal. I don't think operationally there would be too much to be concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, by its very nature, a solar array on a roof is outside of the operational area. So as Jack's described, it's about the logistics of accessing the roof in order to install, and the actual battery systems are relatively small, than the size of a trailer maximum, so deploying that somewhere on the site is relatively easy as well. So from an operational disruption point of view, of course, people need to communicate and work closely with us, but it's fundamentally outside of operational areas.
Okay, great. And another thing that occurred to me was that a company that might have multiple sites, does this mean that they will now consider their energy strategy on a local basis, site by site, rather than centrally, because each site would be different, or not?
Exactly. Yeah. So we would look at each site individually and how we can build the best fit solution for that site and its operation. We would take it site by site, definitely, rather than a kind of catch-all under one system. Work with businesses, and it might be that they want to do this in a staged process and site by site. That's certainly the way that we would advise. And you've got to look at what you can do operationally and within the parameters of that site, that rooftop, or any adjacent land to make usage of generating their own electricity. I'd say probably going back just in terms of this disruptive element to this, the context here obviously is the electrification of fleets that were previously diesel. The biggest impact to businesses is in going through that electrification process itself. Lots of businesses, and Nick's work with lots, that are currently looking at fleet electrification, what they need to do. And previously there's been a lot of pushback in the upfront cost of electrifying fleets, of which there is some support now from government, which is fantastic. I'm sure we'll come on to. But key from our side is really to emphasize that businesses need to engage with the operational cost involved with depot charging and putting in their own infrastructure. And it's key that they go into that with their eyes open.
Right.
Yeah, and just to add another point, Paul, again, while you do need to look at each site specifically because the demand will be different, the operational hours might be slightly different, the size of fleet might be different, that exercise of us designing it by site is really simple. although it's not a cookie cutter, you wouldn't do one solution for all sites within a business. It's not a barrier. Looking at that bespoke site by site is relatively easy.
Okay, great. You mentioned the government introducing grants to support electrification of fleets. Do you have a view on that, about how effective that will be?
I mean, I think any funding that's coming into a space like this has to be viewed positively. I think the headline £1 billion funding facility that's available in this space is fantastic. The number that we should be emphasizing more is the £137 million that's there for the depot infrastructure side of things, because again, historically, the logistics and transport sector have always seen the barrier as being the upfront cost of these vehicles. And actually, my argument would be that it's the getting the infrastructure in, it's the grid connections, it's the chargers, it's selecting the chargers themselves, and it's ultimately the pence per kilowatt hour cost to run those vehicles, which is the important point, not the upfront cost of the vehicle. What we're seeing now with the increases in transmission charges, the fixed charges that we mentioned, is that it's great having some grant funding up to £81,000 for EHGV. But if your fixed charges on your bill are going up by £75,000 or more this year, that grant is quite quickly swallowed up in the operational costs of running these fleets. So it's very important to understand and make usage of the carrot while it's there, because the government typically starts with an incentive and then comes along with a stick later on and a mandate. So it's key that businesses look at ways that they can make usage of the funding, but then also crucially look at how they deploy energy or generate their own energy on site to give them the lowest cost of that pence per kilowatt hour rate that it costs to run those fleets over the medium and longer terms, which makes this really viable for businesses as an alternative to diesel at the minute.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sure there are people listening to this who have had projects where they've wanted to increase the size of a site or the way that they operate a site and haven't progressed with a project because the cost of getting further energy from the grid has been prohibitive. Anything that helps people get those projects and bridge the gap is positive. So we're delighted, we're supportive, and we think it's great. But again, it's about people really understanding how to use those grants, where to deploy them in terms of setting themselves up for the future. And again, that's where people like Wattstor really can advise and help people access that in the most productive way for the long term.
Okay.
And ultimately, it comes back to solutions like Price Protect that you mentioned. We obviously can't help with the upfront cost of electrifying a fleet, but what we can help is bring funding into that infrastructure cost that comes with putting in chargers and the electrification itself, the grid connections and the generation. So that's where we really help businesses to save costs and have a operational cost that is lower than what they have at the moment.
Sure. Okay, look, this has been great. Let's finish with two questions with the same theme though, long term and short term. What can logistics businesses do, or what should they be thinking about, I should say, in terms of long-term resilience and energy risk? So let's look at the future. What can they do about that first? And then we'll come on to the here and now.
Well, I would always say renewables. Obviously, we're a major supporter of renewables, not only because now they're frankly the cheapest form of energy, much cheaper to produce energy from your own on-site systems than it is to get electricity from the grid. So not only are they cheaper than the fossil fuel alternatives now, but they are also more resilient. If you're building your own generation on site, you haven't got the issues, you're not exposed in the same way to the geopolitical issues that we're seeing at the moment. It's a much more resilient system because you're building your own infrastructure and you're not so reliant on the grid. So I think in the long term, renewables and renewable-led electricity is not only more resilient, it's also cheaper. And it shows again that the kind of fossil fuel industry that was previously always seen as being sort of resilient and cheap is now neither of those things.
So some great advice there, Jack and Nick. Have you got examples from the industry, living, breathing examples or case studies that you can tell us about where your interventions and implementations have worked?
Sure. So we've worked with National Highways across a number of their motorway service area sites where they were looking to deploy rapid chargers, so electric vehicle chargers, DC rapid chargers on very limited grid connection sites. So they started off in the conventional way of asking for a new grid connection to upgrade their grid connections on site. And these were typically 500 kVA or smaller grid connections, and they were looking to install multi-megawatts of chargers on these grid connections. The grid came back and offered them a time frame of between 8 to 10 years that it would take for them to upgrade. So not only there was a long duration that they had to wait, but also a huge cost for upgrading those grid supplies. So instead, we worked with them to design battery storage systems to help supplement their existing grid supplies without having to upgrade their grid connections. And we're now rolling those out across multiple motorway service areas across the UK on major A roads and motorways with national highways. They did this before the increase of the transmission charges. They didn't know that it was going to take place, but in deploying those batteries a couple of years ago, they've now got that buffer, which means they haven't upgraded the grid connections. They're not having to pay these additional charges for a higher grid connection, and the battery is supporting the rollout of major megawatts of DC chargers on very limited grid connections. We've also worked with Maudsley's, who are one of the largest independent distributors and wholesalers of pharmaceuticals in the UK. We worked with them on their new warehouse in Doncaster to design a rooftop solar PV and battery storage system. It's been a fantastic project for the business. For most of the year, in fact, they are operating pretty much off-grid, so they have very limited import from the grid. And the next phase of the project is they're looking at electrifying their fleets and installing DC chargers on site and using the battery to intelligently utilize the energy when it's cost effective to do so, to give them a very low cost unit rate for charging their vehicles from their own on-site energy. So it's been a fantastic project and one that we see repeated time and again in the sector.
Okay, thank you. Now we comes to our section now, which we bring into every podcast, every edition of Logistics Business Conversations, which is where we ask our guests to look into the crystal ball and tell us what we can expect in their sector of the industry in perhaps the few years or the decade ahead. What's your view?
What's next in logistics? We're asking the experts. In our crystal ball segment, industry leaders share their predictions for the future.
Well, my view, Nick might say otherwise, but I think the transition to electric fleets now is irreversible. That is happening. We will see more and more, and it will take time. And businesses have got to understand the ways in which they help to implement this. But it is happening. We're moving towards a renewables-led grid as well. Again, I think situations like we're seeing in Iran, we shouldn't focus just on that. That things will get back to normal again, but we've seen it time and again during COVID, during Russia-Ukraine, of geopolitical situations arising and energy costs being affected as a result. So I think we're on the road to a renewables-led grid and electrification of fleets. It's taken a bit longer than we expected, but I don't think I'll get any points for my crystal ball gazing for that. To me, it seems fairly obvious that that's the way that things are going.
Yeah, I think from my side, the two things that people need to really think about are early adoption. So those people who adopt technologies early, I think, especially when it comes to energy, will be winners. You don't want to get behind the curve on this stuff. And that's because of resilience. There's no doubt that the energy requirements for fleet are going to shift. And those people who build resilience into that are the ones who are going to win. That resilience that comes from controlling your own energy supply through batteries, through Wattstor with Price Protect, and almost create their own private wire, which is a phrase that people will be familiar with. But those people who adopt early will be the ones that are resilient, and I believe will be the winners.
What would you say, having heard what you've answered there, what would you say to all the net zero gainsayers who think net zero is something we should be steering away from?
Well, totally the opposite. And frankly, for the reasons that I've just mentioned, that renewables, it has the upside of being green and much better for the planet. But frankly, we look at this from the economic perspective. We love renewables first and foremost, and batteries particularly because it's cheaper than the grid alternative. That's why through Price Protect, we guarantee that the price that the customer pays is lower than the grid. And we can put in a price cap for up to 25 years, because of the way that we produce energy on site. So not only is it more cost effective, but it's also much more resilient. So I think the green is an upside and is a further benefit, but I would talk first and foremost about cost and resilience above and beyond the green side of things.
Yeah, I think for most businesses, the reality is the ambition is there to try and reduce your impact from a sustainability point of view. But fundamentally, we are commercial enterprises within the sector, and logistics businesses have to make a profit. And anything that reduces cost is positive. Anything that avoids cost by not needing to pay for greater access to the grid is positive. The resilience Jack's spoken to, if you've got control of your own energy supply, and that gives you resilience and makes you less susceptible to geopolitical issues. And all of that is positive from a sustainability point of view as well. So it really is genuinely a win-win-win. And then with Price Protect, you also know that you're not committing to something where the price could go above the market in the future. In fact, quite the opposite.
Okay. That brings us to the here and now, especially to those who may be a bit shocked to find that their charges are going to rise so dramatically. What are the most effective steps companies can take now to reduce risk and improve cost control?
Well, first and foremost is pick up the phone, get in touch, seek some advice. Don't go and look at expanding grid connections. You should be looking firstly about technology or solutions that you can deploy, like batteries, to help mitigate these costs, and get a plan in place, because these charges are coming whether we like it or not, and they are unavoidable. I mean, for all in name, they are a stealth tax, really, because they are designed that businesses can't avoid them. So the way that you can help mitigate them is to get a lower overall cost of energy to your site and make usage of the current connection that you've got without having to expand it unnecessarily.
And get on the blower to Wattstor as well at the same time, right? Listen, Jack, Nick, thanks so much for your time today. Really enjoyed talking to you. It's a very exciting business and it sounds like you're doing some really good work. So as I say, thanks for joining us and see you next time.